Semafor's Principals Live featuring Congresswoman Beth Van Duyne, and our final Principals Live of the year. Appreciate you all braving the rain this morning and joining us. I'm Bennett Richardson, Semafor's General Manager and Global Head of Public Affairs. Semafor is now the world's fastest growing independent news platform, which we're really proud of. In under 2 years, we've grown here in Washington, our headquarters in New York. We now have bureaus in London and San Francisco and Africa and in the Middle East. We recently launched Semafor Gulf, which is great to check out if you follow that region. And really since day one, Semafor's mission has been to provide leaders like yourselves with intelligent, independent, transparent journalism in an increasingly polarized and challenging news environment. We're proud to have established ourselves as leader, nearly 800,000 subscribers to Semafor newsletters in these early days, several million readers to semafor.com, and as you all know, a thriving live journalism platform where we're regularly convening leaders in business, technology, and of course, public policy. In today's program, Congresswoman Beth Van Duyne is going to preview Republicans' plans on taxes, tariffs, trade, and more as they gear up to take control of Washington in January. But first, to kick things off, I'd like to thank our partners, the International Franchise Association, for partnering with us on this morning's program. And on that note, to help set the stage for the Congresswoman's conversation, I'd like to invite IFA President and CEO Matt Haller to join me on the stage for a quick conversation. Matt. Thank you for joining us this morning, sir.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out on such a dreary Wednesday.
I feel like you have such a fascinating point of view into the economy with so many diverse issues represented in franchise. What has been the broader takeaway from the franchising community, especially after the election?
Yeah, so the franchise business model is 800,000 locations, nearly 9 million jobs. We're 3.5% of private sector GDP, and people tend to think of us as restaurants and fast food, but that's only 40% of the franchise economy. So you think about whether it's dog walking services or your UPS store in your community, these are the people and individuals and brands that make up the franchise model. And in terms of our feeling post-election, a month or so later, I think that if there's one thing that the country said that they wanted more of, it was more opportunity and growth. And there's nothing that the franchise community delivers to this country more than opportunity and growth. To go into business for yourself, but not by yourself. And the opportunity that the president-elect, I think, projected that as something that individuals in this country felt like things were costing more, there was less opportunity, there was sort of a burden of regulations. So those are some of the things our members are very excited about changing course on.
Great. To build on that, looking forward to 2025, to continue that momentum of growth around franchising, what is biggest policy priority for the administration and new Congress?
Yeah, I would say two big areas. Number one is around deregulation, and number two is the opportunity for certainty around tax reform. So most franchise businesses, whether you're the brand side or the individual business owner, are pass-through businesses. So every single person in franchising who is an individual tax filer is going to see a tax increase absent Congress taking action to extend expired or expiring deductions in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act before the end of the 2025. On the deregulatory side, we've been facing a number of costly and burdensome regulations, many on the labor agenda side. So at DOL, the National Labor Relations Board, the joint employer rule is the #1 issue that's been impacting the franchise business model, which sort of turns our business model into franchisees and franchisors being essentially one business. Takes that individual owner, so Bennett's local Dunkin' Donuts in the great state of Maine, you are no longer essentially in charge of your own business. The brand now would be responsible for the labor and employment at your location. What's the point of franchising if you no longer have that opportunity to own and control that business entity? So we want to put an end to that in this next administration. A number of issues at the Federal Trade Commission that we're concerned about. We're excited about Commissioner Ferguson just last night being elevated to the chair role, and look forward to a change in the regime and the focus of the FTC overreaching and getting back to its core mission of protecting consumers and updating sensible regulations like the FTC's franchise rule, which is long overdue and helps brands present their franchise offering to those potential new franchise owners in a modern form.
Got it. That's great. Two follow-up questions there. First, I mean, you mentioned a bit about that franchise model and some of the challenges coming into that model. Tell us more about that, and like, what are some of the most common misconceptions about franchising, and how do you address those kind of misconceptions or concepts of how franchising works in your role?
Yeah, I think the first I would say is franchising is not big business, right? It's small business. We have 1,300 member brands at the IFA. Yes, of course, we have some of the most iconic brands that everybody in this room and watching online has heard of, whether it's McDonald's or the UPS store or Hilton Hotels. But brands that are outside the food or hospitality space, let's say. So a Woofie's, right? It's a dog walking service based out in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Stretch Zone, which is helping people get more healthy and deal with the rigor of their daily lives, right? And make you feel healthier in your life. And so franchising is not just big business, it's not just fast food. Those are probably the biggest misperceptions. And the stories of these individuals that own franchises in communities, that's the power of what our business model and what our association really tries to bring to life every day. So appreciate opportunities with events like Semafor and the work we do on Capitol Hill and in the States to help bring those stories to lives. Congresswoman Van Duyne, who will be here shortly, is the co-chair of the Congressional Franchise Caucus. We've done numerous events down in Irving with brands that are headquartered in Texas with the Congresswoman. So connecting those individuals, those real people in some of the most forgotten places in this country with lawmakers to understand the opportunity that franchising creates, again, to help people go into business for themselves, but not by themselves.
That's great. And your example, I think, is such an interesting to think about the sort of two-side of the economic opportunity of franchising, of both those small business owners with local success who can use the franchising model to scale nationally, as well as those folks who can invest in franchises themselves and become those scaled, local business owners. It's really fascinating to think about the two pieces of that. You mentioned, Commissioner Ferguson with the FTC pick. I just wanted to kind of zoom out around that. Of President-elect Trump's picks for top administration jobs, have you been surprised or particularly excited about any of those other picks as these have been rolling out?
Yeah, look, the president-elect put together a very broad and diverse coalition. He reached into constituencies that are traditionally thought of as Democratic constituencies, whether it's minorities or working class Americans, members of labor unions. So we're excited again about the opportunity for growth and the opportunity for more business ownership opportunity through deregulation and tax relief. When you think about some of the most important agencies for the IFA, I mentioned the FTC and Commissioner Ferguson, but I'd also mention Representative Lori Chavez DeRaymer, which there's been some controversy over her selection as the Secretary of Labor. And frankly, we're very excited about Lori's opportunity to bring workers and business together to advance what the president-elect said he wanted to deliver to America. And I think oftentimes we've seen a changing in the balance where one side is leaning all the way towards union leaders, and let's remember that union leaders are not always representative of the members of that union. And so driving growth for workers and small businesses, I think, is what somebody like Representative Chavez DeRaymer can do in that position if confirmed.
Absolutely. You bring up an interesting point on labor, and I just wanted to pull at that for a second. There's an interesting realignment happening in the country right now, especially on labor issues. You're seeing Republicans kind of openly courting rank and file union members, some more alignment on some of those issues. You've been involved in franchising for a long time, been working with these small business owners. Like, what do you think is driving that realignment and the alignment of the Republican Party being able to connect with these like rank and file union members and kind of labor participants?
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity for Republicans to talk more about what they're doing to drive wage growth. And that is really whether you're a member of a union or not, you're looking for opportunities for advancement. And they should take credit for that. And I think they're starting to do that more with President-elect Trump, giving them the cover, in many ways to do that. And looking at the results of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and looking at the results of, a more sensible regulatory framework. So I would say that from a franchising perspective, The business model itself is not inherently anti-labor. It's actually something that we've seen is pro-worker from a standpoint of wage growth, benefits, higher rates of benefits and wage growth in the franchise model than other non-franchise businesses that we've seen. And so some of the policies that we've fought over the last decade, I mentioned the joint employer rule earlier, there's been 4 different joint employer rules over the last 10 years. So the end result of that is friction in the relationship between the brand and the franchisee. None of that is helpful for the employees of that business. So we think putting an end to some of those regulations, allowing small business owners to focus on growth, is going to be helpful for the workers in these businesses.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, and just to have that stability of not dealing with those 4 different sort of programs and regimes, but focusing on growth that way is so important. We're about to hear from Congresswoman Beth Van Duyne. Looking forward to this new Congress. The one thing that Congress could do to set up America's franchise businesses for success and for that economic growth, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, she's a great champion. I mentioned she's the chair of our Congressional Franchise Caucus with Congressman Gottheimer from New Jersey. Recognize franchises as the small businesses that they are. We're part of the solution. We want to be a resource to anybody in Congress and the administration, no matter the party, and we're part of the solution. So we appreciate the opportunity to partner with Semafor, have great champions like Congresswoman Van Duyne here, and if we could have more Congresswomen like Beth Van Duyne up here in Washington, I think the country would be better off.
That's great. Thanks so much, Matt, and thanks again to IFA for your partnership on today's event. I'm thrilled to welcome up Semafor Senior Washington Editor Elana Schor and Congresswoman Beth Van Duyne for our next conversation. Thanks, y'all.
Greetings, everyone. It's my pleasure to be joined this morning by Congresswoman Beth Van Duyne of Texas, a member of the House Ways and Means Committee and Small Business Committee. I want to jump right in, though, to Ways and Means business, namely the tax bill. There's a lot of talk on Capitol Hill right now, a lot of debate between this 2-step approach, where you go border first and then taxes, which top Senate Republicans and Trump officials are backing, and Ways and Means Chairman Smith's preference for one big bill, right? Like, let's use all our political capital and get it all done. Which approach do you favor?
Oh, that's so not fair. Just start right off there. Well, first of all, thank you for all having me, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to come speak on this. We were in the Speaker's office last night until about 9:40, 9:45. So we had quite a long discussion. And people around the table from APROPS, from Financial Services, from HFC, from a Republican Study Committee, obviously from Ways and Means. And these are serious conversations. I think there was a mandate that we saw in November. And that mandate had to do with both the economy. People were looking at skyrocketing costs and wondering how we were going to fix that, and obviously with the border and crime. So those are the 2 top things that we need to figure out. We need to provide solutions for. We had great bills this past session with HR2, with HR1 on our energy, which would help. Mm-hmm. But when we look at what happens, because we are under a timeline, a time crunch, if we let the TCJA proposals end, if they expire, if those tax cuts expire, you're going to see the largest tax increase in our history. It's going to affect 90% of Americans. So how do you avoid that? We have very small margin in the House, as everyone knows, and being able to negotiate and make sure that we get the strongest bill possible is going to be a very difficult haul. So, the question is, do you have one bill that has everything in it? Do you have 2 bills And the two bills, what you'd have in there, are you talking about energy policy? Are you looking at permitting? Are you looking at border? Are you looking at tax? Jason Smith, obviously, in Ways and Means, we have been working on the tax bill now. It's not like all of a sudden the election happened and, oh, let's get to work.
Right.
I mean, we've had over 120 meetings in 20 different states. We have had the vast majority of members who have attended listening sessions that the chairman has put on. We have talked to small businesses, we've talked to large and mid-sized businesses across the country for the last year and a half. This is not new. It's not like we're just started running. So I think the idea is that we could get a tax bill in March. It's not like we're going to have to wait a year. Yes, it's complicated, but we already have a very strong, provable framework. And how much political capital do you need to be able to push something like that through, but also time. And has anybody looked at the calendar, by the way, the calendar that just came out? They're killing us, right? But, I mean, it's a good thing. We need to be home. We need to be talking to our folks, but we really need to be here to be able to provide these solutions, these bills, in the first 100 days of this presidency. So a lot of work is going to need to be done. The concern is that you're going to run out of time, political capital, and actually willpower to get things done if they're not done soon enough. So I think right now, the discussion last night was potentially two bills. But the preference is to have the tax bill first, and then followed by, getting whatever we can in it.
That's fascinating. One aspect of all this, since you mentioned March, which is very rapid, but of course you've done all this work, is the new proposals that the president-elect floated on the trail that have a lot of buy-in in the GOP, although in various pockets, right? One of them is eliminating taxes on tips. He's also talked about Social Security taxation changes.
Overtime?
Yes, and I believe Majority Leader Scalise said he thinks tax on tips could get in. This was just yesterday. Of course, nothing's settled till it's settled, but how do you feel about all these new sort of ideas that the president-elect has out there and how you guys should go about incorporating them?
I think they're great ideas. One of the questions that we're going to have is how do you pay for them?
Yeah.
And looking at the pay for us, it doesn't seem that is as important of a question in the Senate. And again, we had great discussions. We've had a number of these meetings, by the way, with the speaker. He has been very good about, opening his door and having these conversations and listening to what his members are wanting, are willing to fight for, want to have included in these bills. I will definitely give him props for that. We've seen a lot of conversation in a campaign, but again, the question is going to be, how do we pay for this? TCJA, when it was originally introduced, was for a short period of time. It was not a permanent tax cuts. We'd love to see them extended. We'd love to see them made permanent. But the question is, how do you pay for it? TCJA was a proven bill. The question was not, well, is it going to be able to increase the economy? Because that's what it was now. But we've been proven that, when we look at bonus depreciation, when we look at expensing, when we look at R&D, when businesses are given the ability to be able to take those and then be able to get the tax cuts on them, they're going to invest more. And that will equal higher economic growth, which equals actually the government collecting more in taxes. So we needed to support that. But one of the key points that I don't see included in a lot of conversations is what happens if we don't extend those tax cuts. You saw the bump that TCJA provided. You saw the investment. You saw the patronizing of a number of different manufacturing spots from overseas now back to the U.S. What happens if we don't extend those tax cuts? So we are looking at this is how much it's going to cost us on the plus side, but what about on the loss side? And that was a large part of our conversation last night, is making sure that we recognize and our members recognize that the businesses that are coming to your door and that are talking to you and are saying, look, this is what we were able to achieve. And by the way, this is what we're going to lose if we don't get it, need to be taken seriously.
That's interesting. A wonky tax question, actually, related to
Okay, I am not a wonky tax person. So
feel free to say I got to think about this
can
one.
help us on this.
But it's an important issue to a lot of businesses. Chairman Smith has talked about the pass-through deduction and the importance of that over and above even decreasing the corporate rate, which some Senate Republicans are already on record saying, I'm kind of leaving as is. How do you feel about prioritizing pass-through, or is it not really an either-or?
No, I think it's absolutely important. I think when you start thinking about what's already on the table and losing that, it's one thing to ask for more when we're looking at lower corporate tax rate, as low as 15%. We want to make sure that our businesses has to happen. And again, when you look at pass-through, when you look at 199, you look at what the potential tax increases could be, especially on the small businesses, we have to make sure that we are maintaining our global competitiveness. So I think that's going to be important, and obviously the chairman is prioritizing it, and he's prioritizing it because after all of the meetings that we've had over the last year and a half, that has risen to the top, as well as a number of others. Research and development and making sure that we are maintaining our American innovation is going to be key, and I think what you've seen is there's two really big paths that we've seen. One is where the government continues to grow, and it's growing at the backs of businesses. That was a rejected path, I think, this last November. The other that you are seeing is, okay, the government has a very limited role, stay there. Allow businesses to use their innovation, allow them to compete, stop tying hands behind their back from an American perspective so that we can't go out and compete. We have some of the most strict rules, and the only ones that we seem to be holding accountable are American businesses. We look at our lax trade policies, we look at USMCA, we look at our trade policies with China, and it seems like we hold our own businesses to a completely different standard, and that's going to be discussed. We can talk about trade as well, but making sure that we are not overtaxing, overburdening, overregulating. We can talk about DOGE and what we're trying to achieve on that end. But we have seen the two different phases. And again, I'm from Texas, we're looking at low regulation, we're looking at low taxes, we're looking at the ability to be able to have opportunities, and we're seeing it firsthand. One of the fastest growing states in the country, we're seeing businesses that are moving overwhelmingly from places like California, in New York, in Chicago, into Texas, regulations because of the understanding and the positive business environment. We'd love to be able to share that with the rest of the country, and I think what the work done on Ways and Means shows that the work that the Republican conference has done on tax has proven that.
Well, speaking of your home state and trade, good segue. We have some stats that actually surprised me. In 2023, Texas-Mexico trade totaled more than $270 billion. I had no idea that Mexico and Texas were top trading partners for each other. How do you view the 25% tariffs that the president-elect has proposed on Mexico in that context? Are you concerned about your home state's economy? And if not, why not?
When you think about Texas, we actually are the largest in the state, in the country, beating both California and New York combined. Just to give you an idea of how important it is for Texas. I think tariffs are a great tool. When I was down in Mexico City with Chairman Smith and some other members of the Ways and Means Committee speaking with then President Obrador, you look at USMCA, and that could have been a very strong tool. But when not held accountable, when countries like Mexico are not held accountable for actually maintaining the expectations of that agreement, how do you maintain your fairness in that when the U.S. is obviously is being held to one account, and Mexico is being allowed to have unfair trade practices? How do you get their attention? What do you do? Tariffs, I think, are a great negotiating tool. Immediate reaction, by the way, has already happened from some of these countries who are like, no. Look at Canada, for example. No, we're willing to come to the table and talk. President Trump hasn't even been sworn in yet, and you're already having, heads of state coming and wanting to negotiate. Because like it or not, the fact is when he says something, people take it seriously because he's proven that he'll do it. It's not just a mere threat, we'll do it. Now, under the economy, the last 4 years, we've seen what happens when Mexico is allowed to walk all over us, when China is allowed to walk all over us. If tariffs is the way to be able to get, in a short term, to be able to get their attention, to be right actors, and to actually hold our agreements to task, then so be it. Tariffs is not the four-letter word that I think many people think it is. For Texas, trade is very important, we recognize that, but we're also willing to work with a president who recognizes the fact that you've got to have, when you sign an agreement, that it means something. And you're gonna hold China, you're gonna hold Texas accountable. We look at our steel industry, for example. So in our district, we've got one of the top 2 largest producers of steel in the US, commercial metals. And we have seen what's happened with our steel trade, how China has been able to dump and get around these bills that we've had, these agreements that we've had, and to the detriment, again, of our steel industry in the US, and our steel producers in the US. So we have a bill leveling the playing field that would actually give more tools in our trade agreements to be able to go after these repeat bad actors. It needs to happen.
Interesting. I mean, that's a pretty targeted, right, and focused approach on, hitting the problem where it hurts. Some critics of, this use of tariffs as a negotiating tool say, if the president-elect does follow through, it'll hit consumers in the pocketbook through our higher prices on goods. Basically, I mean, to put it bluntly, you've criticized the Biden administration for not having an aggressive enough trade agenda, and it could get too aggressive, right, if the across-the-board tariffs are imposed, according to some economists. Do you think that's overblown? Is it?
These are the same critics who have applauded this previous administration where we've seen 20% increase in inflation, where everybody's gotten nailed in their pocketbooks. When you think about how much 50% increase in energy costs is a direct result of energy policy. So forgive me if I don't really listen to the critics who have applauded and then denied, I'm sorry, this was only gonna be short term. We're in how many years now? So yeah, I'm really gonna take those critics very seriously.
Fair enough. To pivot a little bit to border, the president-elect is doubling down on his day one plans, talking about executive orders for widespread deportations. It's still kind of unclear exactly what that would look like. When you were mayor of Irving, Texas, you implemented a pretty unique program where local police worked with ICE. If you could talk a little bit more about that and say, do you see this as a model or not for what the president-elect might want to do?
So when I was on city council, when I was mayor, this was under the Obama administration, that we had a number of people who were coming into our country illegally, and we were trying to figure out where we were going to house them. It was a problem. What we found was that people who were here illegally, typically when they were committing crimes, the victims were other people who were here illegally. We decided to take a very strong, aggressive program. It's our criminal alien program, CAP 24 is what we called it. And we partnered with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. Imagine that. Law enforcement from the city level, from the state level, and working together to maintain laws, to enforce laws, to keep justice. We received a tremendous amount of criticism from sanctuary city mayors. I was on the board of the U.S. Conference of Mayors at the time, berated by them. What we found was our city actually became safer, became the 5th safest city in the country. And guess what? Businesses want to move to a safe city. So as much as the media tried to portray that as awful, horrible, they did not understand the issue. One, that by taking out the criminal element, you are making everybody in the city safer, but specifically those people who are most preyed upon, which were other people who were in your city illegally. Number 2, by working with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, you were very much targeting folks who are there in a criminal element. So where if the cities don't want to work with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, it's not like they're going to stop doing their job and not going into places like Chicago, Boston, Denver. It's not they're not going to do their job, but instead of working hand in glove with local law enforcement, they're going to do it on their own. Which means instead of going into jails because criminals have been detained, ICE has been called, they come and they do an interview and they deport them, they're going to homes. So instead of having just the criminals now that are being interviewed, you have the entire home. So while you may have only have had one person who is deported as a result of a call or a crime, you're not going to have 9. So it's going to have the exact opposite, I think, reaction that these blue city, sanctuary city mayors are wanting to have. But it is a targeted approach. It is an effective approach. And for everybody who said, how are we possibly going to deport all of these people? There's no method to your madness. It's never going to happen. You can absolutely do it. You can do it in a very effective manner, meaning in a very efficient manner. You're not having to spend billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars to do it. But law enforcement is working with law enforcement. And as a mayor who worked very closely with her police department, understands that the local law enforcement knows where the crime is. They know where the pocket areas are, and it is a much better system. It is better for everybody. It was a successful program. We did it for years. We did it basically until under Obama's administration, they started cutting back, and then under the Biden administration, they eviscerated the ability for immigrations and customs enforcement to be able to work with these local law enforcement agencies. They prevented them from being able to deport criminal, illegal aliens.
So on that note, you're obviously a former Trump administration official from term 1. Like, have you talked to his folks about this and emphasized prioritizing that, or?
Tom Hellman, I talked over the weekend. He's got this. He has got this in spades.
Fair
I
enough.
offered up, I said, look, we were doing this back in 2006, 2007. Is there anything I could do to help? And he's like, we've been friends for years, but if you want to talk about somebody who takes this job seriously, who has the chops, who has the experience, who has the support and the respect of not only the state officials on this, specifically in Texas, I know that as a fact, but also of Customs and Border Patrol, it's Tom Hellman. And so, yes, have we discussed this? Absolutely. He has seen this work, and that is why that's where they're starting, that's where they're prioritizing.
Very interesting. To pivot back to Ways and Means business for a moment, the House has passed a bill, and we expect it obviously to pass again next year, that would essentially, it was designed to crack down on these campus protests against Israel and what it's up to in Gaza by allowing the Treasury Department to more quickly revoke the tax-exempt status of certain groups whose funding, was potentially linked to these protests, essentially linked to what the bill described as terrorist groups. However, some nonprofits said, hey, hold on, especially if they're progressive leaning, they started to say, we're worried that if Trump gets reelected, which of course now he will be president, he could use this as sort of a bigger hammer against his political critics and enemies. What do you make of that criticism of this bill? Is it overblown?
All I know is all of the things that they've attacked President Trump on, that they've said he's going to do, they've done to him. So, and they've abused. We're looking at universities now that have basically become hotbeds of creating future citizens, of creating, young people to hate our country. I'm a graduate in the other, C college and university, and I went to Cornell. She went to Columbia, and. I was recently back on my campus, and I was talking to a number of the Jewish students that were there. And I'm old, apparently, because that never happened when I was on campus. The actions, the activities, it was immediately struck down. And now with this whole idea, well, we've got to be more understanding. There have been students who have been chased. There have been students who have been assaulted. There have been students who have been harassed, who have been threatened. And we're allowing that to happen because we don't want to offend. Like, I don't know, if you are not going to protect the safety of your student body, why are we giving you taxpayer-funded, money, which is what we're doing with the grant programs, with their tax-exempt status? Why are we doing that if you can't even protect the basic needs? And what is the public good that you're giving when you are teaching people who are here to hate our country? That's kind of what the next generation is being taught. And if you are here on a student visa and you are committing crimes, you are assaulting police, you are taking over and terrorizing students, you are committing crimes, you should be deported. It is not a right to be in the US. It is a privilege. And if this is how you're handling that privilege, why are we preventing it? And so I think we are looking at, I know Jason Smith again has been very assertive in saying we are cracking down on these universities, looking at Yale, looking at Harvard, looking at Columbia. I love you, But, our alma maters are not always handling this in the right way. And again, if you are not going to be doing a public good, all of that needs to be on the table. I don't think we're targeting anybody other than the criminal offenders. in looking at if you are not doing a public good, why are you getting public dollars?
Well, that leads me to a follow-up, which is, we had a couple of other bills, right? Not just the one that I was referencing about tax-exempt status, the University Accountability Act, and the one related to student visas. I imagine you see all those coming back up and passing quickly. Do you see more efforts at Ways and Means on this front?
Again, we're looking at, a number of different ways. I mean, we are looking at dollars that universities get from, again, public dollars, and saying, as a university, if you are sitting on billions and billions of dollars, which are, in our endowments, tens of billions of dollars that you're sitting on, and yet you're graduating students who can't get jobs when they graduate because they've spent 4 or 5, sometimes 6, 7 years feeling good about themselves, all at taxpayer expense, but you graduate and you can't get a job. And you can't pay back those loans. Why should the general taxpayer be on the line for that? Why should I have to pay for somebody who can't get a job, but the universities are being made whole? So maybe it's time we're also looking at making sure that we're holding those universities accountable for graduating students that, I don't know, can actually pay back their loans. We are looking at a number of different ways of being able to do that. So it's not just on some of the anti-Semitic waves that we've been seeing, but the fact that so much money is going into education and it seems like the outcomes are getting worse.
Very interesting. To pivot back a bit to this reconciliation bill, you sponsored a resolution last year about protecting Social Security and Medicare and the value of that. Some in the party are discussing potentially looking at those entitlements as you craft this reconciliation bill. Specifics yet to be detailed. Would you support potentially, I don't want to say cutting, but perhaps changing or relooking at Social Security and Medicare as part of the reconciliation debate?
Well, you look at Social Security, those are the top 2 really cost issues that we've got, right? I mean, those are the most expensive programs that we've got. And again, are we getting out of them what we need? Social Security is not, it's not a bank for Democrat proposals to be able to borrow from, which is what we've seen. So my bill was supposed to basically say that we are not going to allow other programs to be able to borrow from those. When you put into Social Security, that's your dollars. You should be able to get that back. But how is the program being run? How are the dollars that are being put into that program being spent? And we, again, I just talked about education. The more money we put in there seems to be the worse outcomes we get. Healthcare is another one. The more regulations, and I'll tell you, we have had a number of different roundtables in District 24 alone, where we've talked to doctors, where we've talked to healthcare providers. And they'll tell you the way that CMS is running these programs is costly. They're not able to spend time talking to their doctors. Doctors are like, we spend 90% of our time in a computer. We're not able to talk to our patients because all of this is CYA at this point. The more regulations you add, the more boxes that we've got to check. We're spending money having to hire people to go into our offices with us to go talk to patients because they're over us, they're writing notes. We're now having to hire note takers. We're not practicing medicine, we're following regulations. That has made it completely inefficient. It costs more, access is worse, quality is decreased. That is a result of, I would say, is a direct result of regulatory authority that we have given to our agencies that are way over their skis. So when we're looking at Medicare, when we're looking at Social Security, how do we have the ability to be able to affect the costs? If the cost is too high, it's not because our patients, our providers, or our retirees are benefiting from it. It's because we as a system are eating those dollars. We're wasting those dollars. And I think when you start looking at what Elon Musk and Vivek want to get accomplished, it's been something I've been talking about for years. Regulations kill us. They're not sexy to talk about until now. They don't make headlines until now. But you go in and you start attacking that, people aren't going to feel it. In fact, they may feel it in a better way because it's a more efficient policy. It's much more helpful for them. And I've talked to doctors, you're not going to be getting paid as much. But if you're able to get those dollars not having to waste them on CYA, would it be better for you? And overwhelmingly, they're like, yes. So it's not always the dollars that we're putting in, it's the dollars that as a government, as a waste and fraud and abuse that we're taking out.
Fascinating. So we're almost at time, but since you mentioned DOGE, I'm going to sneak in one on that. Some Democrats looked at the 2026 deadline for DOGE to issue proclamations and said, oh, we can't wait to make Republicans pay for cutting this and that in the midterms. What do you make of that timetable? Do you fully expect to maybe act on some of it early? Is that just political posturing for you?
Look, I think we had a great meeting last week with both Elon and Vivek, and they took down notes after notes after notes. It's not for a lack of ideas, it's for a lack of execution. And, you know, I look at somebody like an Elon Musk, and you want to talk about somebody who can execute? We're not going to do business as usual. This is a new administration. There's a new sheriff in town. We've done business as usual, and it's gotten us over $36 trillion in debt. It is time to shake things up, clean things down, you know, pare things down, get rid of the waste, the fraud, the abuse. And I am excited. I think a lot of folks, when I go home, people are excited. You look what's happening in our stock market. People are excited. And it's because it's not going to be business as usual.
And you're not worried about a late 2026 pre-election vote on anything? Bring it on, basically. These cuts are...
Look, if we can achieve what we said we're going to achieve, bring it on. And I think you've got the energy right now to be able to do that. You've got the ideas to be able to do that. It's all a matter now of executing.
Well, that's a good note to end on. Thank you, Congresswoman Van Duyne. It was a pleasure. I'm going to turn this back over to Bennett.
Please welcome back Semafor General Manager and Global Head of Public Affairs, Bennett Richardson.
Thank you, everybody, so much for being here. Thanks again to Congresswoman Van Duyne and to the International Franchise Association for partnering with us on today's event. Before you get going, I wanted to just share two dates for your calendar for the new year. On January 14th, back here at Gallup, we'll be continuing this conversation about the road ahead for America's small businesses with Oklahoma Congressman Kevin Hern and a number of other top speakers we'll be announcing in the coming days. And then also, please save the date for our biggest event of the year, the World Economy Summit next spring, which will be April 23rd to 25th. We'll have a whole bunch of other Principals Live and other conversations in between then. So until then, have a great holiday, and thanks again, everybody, for being here. Appreciate it.